This car is the most honest car you ever see.
It's been a dream ever since I've had it.
The first time I heard that engine screaming, I thought, I gotta have one of those.
For me, the cars have personality.
What's great about a BMW Classic is the community that surrounds it.
When you listen to that, that's why we're here.
Welcome to the latest episode of Classic Heart, the BMW Group Classic podcast. My name is JP, and today I speak to a man who's working for the most powerful letter in the automotive world, Frank van Meel, the director of BMW M. Frank, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us at the Classic Heart podcast.
Good morning.
I think you have a very, very busy year this year, because you're celebrating 50 years of M. So M has nothing to do with the boss of James Bond. It's the motorsport department from BMW that has grown into a fantastic own brand with an own development. You celebrated many parties already. Which one was the best so far?
That's quite a difficult question because there are parties all over the world following our motto, We Are M. And I can't be everywhere, so I haven't been to all of them. But of the parties I've been to, I must say they all have their different characters, so it's really difficult to choose one over the other. But I'd say the ones that I remember the most are the Concorso d'Eleganza at the Villa d'Este in a beautiful setting with a lot of also classic cars, where we revealed the M4 CSL, but it was just a great setting. And also, of course, the Festival of Speed in Goodwood, where we were the honored mark this year, of course, because of 50 years of M, and where we also had the world premiere of the M3 Touring and the LMDh, our Le Mans Daytona hybrid prototype, our BMW M hybrid V8 race car on top of the monument in front of the building. So I'd say those are the parties I do remember the most right now.
And I have to say that at the Festival of Speed, the setting of M was fantastic. Right on the straight before the last bench, and then with nice container village. So really celebrating absolutely motorsport and driving fast in a sense. So would you say that this is one of the best celebrations because you see cars moving and also an aesthetic display?
I think the setting is just great because it combines the past, the present, and the future. So you can see the race cars and the very historic, popular cars from the past. You can also see the current cars, the upcoming cars, like with us, the M3 Touring. But also you can already have a glimpse into the future. There were a lot of companies showing concept cars, and we also showed our LMDh race car, which is not on the road yet and will be racing from January on. So I think the combination of the past, the present, and the future is what makes Goodwood so special, and also, let's say, the spirit of the whole event, with a lot of just highly emotional fans of all kinds of brands, but also, of course, for us, a lot of fans of M that were there. And I think the special thing about our anniversary already is that it's not just one day, which would have been the 24th of May, but we celebrate 365 days. I wouldn't suggest to do that at home, but for our company, I think it's just great to celebrate the whole year with our fans.
And it's needed because if you look back in the history from 1972 until these days, the development that M has gone through is absolutely stunning, especially if we look at the latest creation of BMW M, the hybrid V8 LMDh race car. This car, for those who are not familiar with all the abbreviations, will start in the Le Mans Daytona hybrid category and is therefore able to start for FIA World Endurance Race Championships. And the livery of this car, saying the painting or better the foil, is absolute reminding us on the tradition of the art cars when we saw a BMW M1 created by Andy Warhol and other cars starting at endurance racing. This is absolute in the tradition of M.
Yes, I think that is also an interesting thing. It's not an art car though, but our designers did something different from the usual livery that we have on our cars. Michael Scully, as our designer for the LMDh race car, he had a look at the IMSA race cars from the past, and he put them all on the LMDh car, but of course in a little bit different way than you used to do that. And if you look really good at the car, you can find, I think, 7 of the historic race cars, from a Z4 to an M8 GTE, but also, of course, the 3-liter CSL. And there's a trick to find them, I have to admit, because they have numbers on them. So if you do know the classic race cars and you do know the numbers that they were wearing, you can find them more easily on the LMDh.
What a nice idea. So you can't give us a little hint how to find out which cars are reminiscent in the new car?
I'd say just take a closer look. It will take you some time to undisguise them, but I'd say it's 7 cars. It's the turbo on it, it's the 3-liter CSL, it's the M8 GTE, it's the Z4. Yeah, just take a closer look and try and find out what are the 7 cars that are on it. And they all raced in IMSA, so that is one of the keys. It's not globally, because we start in IMSA the next year with the LMDh, so they are all IMSA race cars.
Wow, I think that's a good thing to do, and what a kind of an honoring these famous race series. Absolutely cool. I can't wait to see that, and I will definitely have a look after we finish our little chat. I will make sure that I find everything, and I send you a message if I found them.
Okay.
And we can invite all our listeners to do the same. So look for the latest picture of the new race car, and you will find it out. And then please drop us a line when you find all the cars mentioned by Frank. Frank, for those who are not so familiar, only a few will this be, please tell us about the story of M and how it fits into the BMW group.
Well, the story of M, since we're celebrating our 50th anniversary, started 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, Bob Lutz, as a matter of fact, was the board member for marketing and sales within BMW. And he wanted to push the brand also towards more sportiness. And he had the idea of founding a motorsport company within the company. And he looked for someone to run that company. And he convinced Jochen Neerpasch, that he knew from the past, to come to BMW and to be one of the founding members of the new motorsport GmbH in 1972. And to be more successful in racing, because BMW was racing with 3-liter CSLs, but they were not as fast as they could have been. And they were run by external companies, more or less. So Bob Lutz's idea was to take that in-house and start racing really from a company perspective. So as we today would say, works racing. And that was what Jochen Neerpasch started off with. And he was very successful with the 3-liter CSL. And from the year on, he started winning racing. But of course, to be allowed to go into the races, you had to have some homologation cars as a manufacturer. So that's more or less the history of M. It started with racing and the homologation cars with the number plate that you needed for being allowed to enter the race. So in 1972 were a couple of hundred cars that M started with a number plate, and last year it was 163,500 with a number plate. So that's a little bit the story of M over the past 50 years. But still the connection between motorsports and the series production cars is very, very close, because our GT3, GT4 cars have the same engine as our M3, M4, even M2 and X3M, X4M cars. And now the LMDh is going to run with a V8 hybrid engine, as well as the upcoming XM that will also feature a V8 hybrid drivetrain. So for us, it's very, very important to stick to the history of the past, not sticking in the sense that you repeat what you did all the time, but you keep this DNA up and continue into the future. So that is, in a nutshell, a jump from 1972 to today and an outlook into the future.
And I think what you said is completely correct, that the massive growth shows there's a demand for emotional cars, which gives you the feeling of as close as you can of driving on a track. in a sense, and that you get all the DNA over into also the road cars. I think that's very interesting. But you mentioned the 3.0 CSL. What I like is if you look at all the legendary liveries they have, Jägermeister, the very own one, Alpine White, everything. So how important for you is the livery of a car, saying also the styling of a car? Because if you look back, all the cars that are now presented the last couple of months, they have a strong visual impact, not only in shapes, but also in livery design. So how important is that for you?
Well, I think you can only go into the future in a strong way if you know where you come from. So for us, it's really important to see what the past brought us and to take some of that with us, where we say that is something that it made us really strong in the past and we would like to keep, but of course also to adapt in some places. But of course the Alpine White is a classic race color, and that's something we keep over the time. But also sometimes we do use other famous colors, like on the M3 Touring we used as a positioning color an old color. As a matter of fact, we used the Daytona Violet, which we also had on the M5 Touring or also on the E30 M3. So for us, every now and then we do use things that were popular in the past just as an additional point in our lineup or in our products, because we always also want to tell our community we do not forget what we did in the past. We just build up on that and create also something new, but sometimes we also add something classic from the past.
May we speak about your personal past a little bit to get an understanding how Frank ticks from a car point of view? So what is your earliest car or / BMW related childhood memory if you look back?
Well, I'd say, of course, the one where I was in closest contact to BMW was when I made my driver's license in the Netherlands, 1984. It was on a 316, BMW 316. Of course, it's more or less the smallest engine. There also was a 315, but that was the 316. But it was so nice to drive that car. It was a manual, of course, with big instruments, and it was so impressive to drive because it just fit like a suit, and it's good to learn to drive a car on a BMW. So from that standpoint, from that time on, I always said when I grow up, I want to drive a 3 Series BMW. And currently I am driving an M3 competition, so I made it.
Wow.
Took some years though, but I got there. And also there was a famous movie in the 1980s, I think it was called The Specialists. It was a French movie playing at the Côte d'Azur. It was about a bank robbery in Nice. I don't want to tell the whole story, but it was about mafia, police, and so on. But the guards of the casino were driving a 323 BMW with a white body kit, and the two that were going to rob the bank drove one without the white body kit, and then there was a car chase with these two cars going on for ages, racing along the Côte d'Azur. So that was where I thought, oh man, I need to have a car like that. And when I was studying automotive engineering in Berlin, I always had a look at a 323 in Shadowline with 3-part BBS wheels on them, but I couldn't afford them because I was still a student. But as I said, it worked out at the end.
And now imagine young Frank coming from Zwolle to big Berlin at that time. Still divided in 2 parts, right? When you started studying, or was it already unified?
No, it was still divided. My mother is German and she came from Berlin, and my father is Dutch, so I grew up bilingual. And the whole of my life, always for Christmas, we went to Berlin, to Germany, because in the Netherlands, Christmas was not that popular. In the Netherlands, it's what they call Sinterklaas. Early December, you celebrate St. Nicholas. So that was the big celebration for kids. So I had 2 big celebrations every year in December, first in the Netherlands and then at the end of December in Berlin. And I grew up whole of my life with a divided city, and I started studying there when the city was still divided in 1985. So I saw the wall come down. I was standing on the wall, as a matter of fact, in Berlin when it came down. So I think that was the most emotional moment of my life.
Wow. And was your mother also with you?
No, she was in the Netherlands at that time, but I was there because you could feel it was happening. You could see the train rolling, and you knew it cannot be stopped anymore. So it was just a matter of time, and you start pushing. Then every day you go a step further, and at one stage we just climbed the wall in front of the Brandenburg Gate. It was not just a wall, because that would be very thin. It was a wall, but behind that it was an alley, and there was a roof on that. So it was about 2 meters behind the wall that you could stand on. So we were all standing on that wall. And at some stage we even jumped off the wall on the east side because we said they cannot kill 10,000s of people or put them to jail. So they threw us out afterwards again, but they didn't do anything to us. But we just started, nagging on the wall, and because it was unstoppable anyway.
I think what a great experience. That's absolutely a one-timer.
It is. And
when you studied automotive engineering in Berlin, did you also get in touch with the GDR car culture like Trabant and Wartburg, or was this not a scene in Berlin anyway?
Well, of course, I've seen them, and you could look into them, but you were not allowed to drive in those cars at that days. Mm-hmm. But after the wall came down, we got a Trabant, a 601, on to our university, to our where we worked, just to study that car. And it was really funny to drive because it was completely different. I think the biggest difference was that the steering has no, how do you say that in English? It's, if you steer in a normal car, from a kinematic standpoint, the steering will always go back to straight forward.
Yes.
Because the kinematics are in that way, but not in a Trabant. So if you steer, and yet then you want to end the turn and you leave the steering wheel, it will not go back. It will just stay there where it is. So you already look forward and you let the steering wheel go loose, but you still turn in. It doesn't change. So that is a surprise moment for everyone. But I think the car itself was very, very special, the way it was designed, with a lot of plastic, which was not used in the West anymore. Of course, the whole construction of the car was a little bit dangerous regarding accidents, but it was very practical.
I think it was the choice to be looking at the economic situation of that time in that country. So therefore, it's a legendary car. And I think maybe the steering would stick on the left because of the communist background. Maybe that's the reason why it doesn't go back. And that's also why it has stopped. Why did you choose to go then into automotive engineering? Is there a family tradition in the car industry or something?
Not at all, but I always wanted to do something with cars. I could tell which car was from what brand before I could read. So I was always telling my parents, at that time you didn't wear seatbelts, so I was lying in the back of the car, looking out of the rear window, and I was telling, look, there comes a Mercedes, a Porsche, a Volkswagen. And my parents were going crazy because I could do that for hours. And they already thought, okay, this guy might end up in automotive industry. And when I was 11, I bought my first Automotor Sport in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
I still remember it was a BMW 745 Turbo on the front page. And I thought, when I grow up, I want to build cars. I need to do something with cars. It's just so emotional. It's so interesting, so high tech. It's cool.
And then you started studying automotive engineering in Berlin. But did you see yourself becoming CEO of BMW M?
No, never. I think it's always easy to say, describe your career path from a standpoint where you are looking back. And then it also makes sense because the storyline fits. But if you look into the future, in the beginning, you just say, okay, I want to start with this or that. I started with Continental. At the time, they were still called ITT Automotive, working on stabilization systems because ESP was not there yet. And Bosch and Conti were working on these systems. So I was in pre-development with simulation models and first cars. So I started as an engineer and a project manager for these systems. I was never thinking about what would be my goal. I want to be CEO of this or that. It was just, I want to do this project because I just love to do that, because it's fun and it's interesting and it's creative. So, yeah.
But without a doubt, I think, including me, some would describe your job as a dream job. Obviously, there are also things in your job that are not as exciting as one could think from the outside. But how does a regular day as the CEO of BMW M look like?
Well, it's difficult to describe because the regular day, there are so many different days. But of course, what you see from the outside is more the external actions like Goodwood or Villa d'Este, where you say, okay, this guy's having fun all the time. But that's mostly on the weekends. So you better discuss the fun with my family if they see that as fun. But a regular day is more about business, of course, because we are running a business. I am running a company. So it's really about business. What is our business model also towards the future? How are sales going? What is our sales organization doing right now? Visit the countries, the sales organizations, talking to customers, but also talking internally within BMW M, but also with the BMW Group, because we do cooperate on a lot of places with BMW Group. So it's more a regular job. But still, the good thing about the regular job is the things we talk about in this regular job are very highly emotional products. So I think that is, like you say, what makes it a dream job in the industry.
And it comes with the perk of having a nice company car. The obligation.
That's also true.
We touched this in the beginning of our conversation. We touched the point of the legacy of BMW M. To put it in one question, this 50-year-long history, how much influence does it have on the development of modern cars?
Well, it has a huge influence because if you drive an M, you have this feeling of precision, dynamics, and agility that comes from racing. And you don't get that just by putting bigger tires on a car or bigger brakes. You have to do a whole new suspension system. You have to change also the car body, the rigidity of the car itself, the architecture of the car. So you do a lot of strengthening in the base car as well. So you change everything you need to change to make a real racetrack car out of a series production car. That was one of the things that BMW M started with the M5 and M3 in the past, and then was copied by a lot of other car manufacturers that said, okay, that's a good example. You don't need to choose between a race car or a track car and a series production car. You can have both properties in one car. And that is a thing that is still imminent and used in each and every M vehicle. So that's the DNA that will not go away. And it comes from racing, but it's also needed. You cannot leave that out.
You said that you did your driving license in 1984. I mean, that's the year where the M635, if I'm not mistaken, CSI was on stage. Unfortunately, this was not your training car for the driving license. But do you have a personal favorite amongst the classic M cars? Could be also racing, it doesn't matter.
That's a very nasty question.
I know.
I do have 6 kids at home, and when you ask me which one is your favorite, I'd say it depends on the day you ask me. But also it will be unfair to choose one over the others because they all have their own character, and the same goes for cars. But if I were to choose a car from the past, I probably would choose the M1 because for me that is something very special, not only because there were not so many built of that car, but because it's completely different and it started more or less the iconic story together with the 3-liter CSL Batmobile of BMW M. For me, that's more or less so the anchor point of where it all started. So that would be something very special, I guess.
Did you have the chance to drive an M1?
Yes, several times. It's not so easy to drive. The seating position in the car is quite interesting, the way you sit in the car. But it's a lot of fun. You're very low, and you're very attached to this loop driver vehicle road. It's very intense. Yeah.
There's a little fun fact about the M1, which is like totally nerdy, but I'm part of a jury sometimes at Concours de Villa d'Este and other Concours events. And when we have M1s to be judged, and I remember there was one it was Alpine white and had white covers of the mirrors. And that's wrong, because every M1 comes with plastic standard mirrors. There's no painted mirrors. Just a fun fact aside.
Yeah, that's
on
right.
the side. Frank, in 2015, you've been already the CEO of M, and then you left for a while, and now you came back with a big bang. So when you started as CEO, you introduced the first M with all-wheel drive. How was the reaction of the M community to that step, having an all-wheel drive?
Well, I think the reaction was just great, because when we introduced the car, everyone was really happy. The more difficult discussions were before we launched the car to the market, because I told everyone we are going to go with a MX drive system, which means all four wheels are driven. And there was a lot of discussion about that, also internally, by the way, because I started with that idea already in 2014. And we built a car, as a matter of fact, because it's always easier to show what you can do with that if you have a car that drives. So we showed that also at that time to our board members. At that time for marketing and sales, it was Ian Robertson and it was Klaus Fröhlich in R&D. And I said, I know that there are some reservations against four-wheel drive, but this is not four-wheel drive in the sense that people think about it, because four-wheel drive always had this subtext, meaning you can go straight forward really with a lot of traction, but if you try to be dynamic, that's the wrong system to have. And I told them, well, then it's not a four-wheel drive, it's a two-wheel drive, it's a rear-wheel drive with more traction. and we had the car, and everyone that drove the car said, now I understand what you mean. This drives like a rear-wheel drive. It drives like an M5, but if you go to wet roads or bad weather circumstances, then you just get a heap more traction. So we convinced everyone within the company by showing them the car.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit more difficult in the public discussion, because people were still thinking about four-wheel drives that can go straight forward but not being dynamic. But I couldn't show them the car, of course, because that you can only show when you launch it.
Yes.
So we had to just allow this discussion, and I kept on telling people, don't worry, M will be M, and the MX drive is nothing more than a rear-wheel drive with more traction. Trust us, we know what we're doing. And when the car came out, as you said, and then the reactions were just great, because everyone got into the car and said, well, this is crazy. It drives like an M, but with much more traction. That's exactly what we were hoping for. Thank you. So you had to just stick with the discussions and say, don't worry, we know what we're doing. Trust us.
So would you also say that being persistent is a very important part, or like, let's say stubborn in a positive way, to convince people about this? I mean, you're an automotive engineer, you should know, and they should trust you, because everyone you take on board with that, saying all-wheel drive can be interpreted as a sporty drive and we can develop it. Is stubbornness one of the elements of being in your position?
Yes. If you have a clear target, if you're sure about your target, then you just have to stick to the target. Because otherwise, it's like the discussion, if you know what you want to do, and if people tell you, no, don't do that because you don't get a job later on or not paid enough or whatever, if you want to do it, just do it, because then it's right. And if that's the same also in the job, if you have a clear vision and you are sure that it is the right way, then you should stick to that way.
What a strong position. I'd really like that. And I think, again, we talk about the things we love, but we also should take positive things out of this podcast, and exactly comments like this and advices like this is what makes this podcast, for me, and I hope for everyone listening, also a special one. But tell me, Frank, how important is the feedback from the M community? Not necessarily people owning M, but also people appreciate it. How are you listening to these guys? Do they have a voice?
They do have a voice. And as a matter of fact, sometimes we question our fans and customers, like we did for electrification. Would you mind if we would go electric? Just to get a better impression. Of course, there are always people saying, for me, it's just a V8. If you don't have a V8, I'm out. But if 95% of all people tell you, no, we're fine, it just should be an M, then it gives you also some confidence. And we were also thinking about manual transmission, to give you another example, because from an engineering standpoint, the manual transmission, although it's lighter than an automated gearbox, it is slower, and regarding fuel consumption, it's maybe not as good as a newest generation automated gearbox. But our customers told us, we don't care, because for us, having this mechanical connection and this task of doing the job yourself, that is so important to us. Please give us the manual transmission, even though from an engineering standpoint, you'd say no, but from an emotional standpoint, please listen to us. So that's why we kept the manual transmission on the M3 and M4 in the newest generation. And also in the upcoming M2, we will stick to the manual as well, because we have so many fans that told us, please do us a favor. We know at some stage manuals will run out anyway, especially if you go towards electric cars, but please keep it up as long as possible. And we listened to our customers and fans and brought it into serious production.
How do you listen to them? So of course I think you can have questionnaires and invite a selected number of clients to have a look at new developments and interview them about them. But it's also like someone who's listening into this podcast now, do you also measure comments on the social media channels? I think there will be a public email where you can send just a contact. How do you get this feeling from the fans and the community?
I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. Of course, it's also on social media, the discussions and letters we get. But also we have our M driving experience, our driver training, where a lot of people come and do different courses from, let's say, the 18-year-old that wants to have a first driving experience in a car. What can happen? How do you do a hard braking, or even your first drift experiences, up to racetrack experiences. And in that case, we always have a very close relationship to everyone that comes to our driving experiences. As a matter of fact, the head of R&D of BMW M, Dirk Hecker, he's also a driving instructor. So if you're lucky and you book a driving experience, it might happen that the R&D head of BMW M is your trainer.
Wow.
So that's why we are in close contact to people that actually drive cars. Some of those don't drive BMW M or BMW, but still they have a very clear view about what's important or not and how they see BMW and M. And also we talk to our dealers who are in daily contact with a lot of customers worldwide in the different regions. And we also have big events like the M festivals, where we have up to 70,000 people just coming to the festival, and also the racing events where we just walk around and talk to everyone that's there. Not only the officials, but also people that are there asking questions or saying, you know, what I would like you to do, if I might say so, couldn't you do this or that? And if you combine all of that, that gives you quite a good view on your own fans, but also on outside views, wishes, trends, and also dislikes.
Frank, besides engineering, the packaging is also super important to create emotions for cars. And with your fellow Dutchman, Adrian van Hooijdonk, who's leading the BMW Group design, you have someone who has a fond understanding of the history of cars and of motorsport. How does this help you in particular?
Well, of course, it is very important to be straightforward also in the design of cars, the way the cars look, because it doesn't help if they feel like a race car, if they don't look like a race car, because then you say something is not right. And Adrian is a great guy because he has a very good knowledge about racing. He's racing himself, by the way, privately. And he has got a very high interest also in the past. And he's got a good feel about racing, also the design DNA of race cars, which of course is also transferred to our series production cars. So that's a great help to have someone that really lives the feeling of motorsports, because otherwise I'm not a designer, so I cannot tell a designer how to make the car right. This inspiration has to come from design. And therefore, it's really great to have Adrian and, of course, also his team with Domagoj Dukic and Marcus Searing, who has a long experience in M design over decades, I must say. So that's really great to have this spirit and feeling also at the designers. So that's why the cars look so great when they come.
Indeed, and we cannot wait to see another 50 years of great car designs. And also, Frank, I would like to thank you for joining in to our little private celebration of this massive anniversary of 50 years of BMW M here at the Classic Heart podcast. And for all that have been followed this podcast and listening to our little chat, I would highly recommend a very exciting book that has been published in the Jubilee year. Obviously, the name of the book is BMW M, the most powerful letter in the world. This book can be found in every well-sorted and well-stocked bookstore. Frank, again, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you as well. It was a pleasure.